How many people can Earth really handle? Right now, there are over 8 billion people alive on our planet. But what if one day that number reached 100 billion? Would there still be enough food? Enough water? Enough energy? Could cities survive? Would countries collapse? Or would humanity simply adapt and build a completely new world? According to current United Nations projections, Earth's population is expected to peak at around 10.4 billion before eventually declining. So realistically, 100 billion people will probably never happen. But imagining this extreme scenario reveals something fascinating. Because once you push civilization to its absolute limits, you start discovering what humanity is truly capable of. The first question is obvious: would we even fit on the planet? Surprisingly, yes. If Earth had 100 billion people, the average population density would be around 671 people per square kilometer. That sounds terrifying at first. But today, places like Taiwan already operate near that density, while huge parts of the island remain undeveloped. Cities like Paris, Seoul, and Barcelona are even denser, and millions of people there still live relatively normal lives. The real difference is that in a world with 100 billion humans, society would become radically urbanized. Massive megacities would dominate the planet. Entire regions would transform into endless connected urban zones filled with vertical farms, automated transportation, underground infrastructure, and self-sustaining energy systems. And somehow, this is where things get even more interesting. Because space is not actually humanity's biggest problem. Resources are. Water, for example, would become one of the most valuable things on Earth. Fresh water only makes up around 3% of all water on the planet, and most of it is trapped underground or frozen inside glaciers. Meanwhile, oceans cover more than 70% of Earth, which means the future would depend heavily on desalination. Right now, turning seawater into drinking water is already possible at industrial scale. The process is expensive, but not impossibly expensive anymore. And as renewable energy becomes cheaper, desalination could eventually become one of humanity's primary water sources. Of course, there's still a major issue: salt waste. For every liter of fresh water produced, nearly another liter of highly concentrated salt waste remains behind. Dumping it back into the ocean damages marine ecosystems, meaning future civilizations would need entirely new systems for mineral extraction and waste management. But even if humanity solves water, food becomes the next nightmare. Or at least, it seems like one. Because when most people imagine feeding 100 billion humans, they picture global famine almost immediately. But strangely enough, modern agriculture suggests the opposite. Some of the world's most efficient agricultural exporters today are relatively small countries like the Netherlands and Denmark. These nations use advanced greenhouse systems, hydroponics, vertical farming, automated irrigation, modified crops, and AI-assisted farming techniques to produce astonishing amounts of food on limited land. In the future, agriculture may barely resemble traditional farming at all. Imagine skyscrapers filled entirely with crops. Underground farming complexes stretching for kilometers beneath cities. Robotic systems harvesting food 24 hours a day without human labor. And meat. That changes too. Traditional livestock farming consumes enormous amounts of land and water. A civilization of 100 billion people probably couldn't sustain modern meat consumption at current scales. Which means lab-grown meat would likely become normal. Not as a luxury, not as science fiction, but as necessity. At the same time, oceans would become giant food production zones. Floating aquaculture facilities could raise fish, shellfish, algae, and other marine organisms at unimaginable scale. Humanity wouldn't just use the land anymore. It would industrialize the oceans. And then comes the biggest challenge of all: energy. A civilization of 100 billion humans would consume absurd amounts of power. Not just for homes and transportation, but for desalination systems, climate control, automated infrastructure, AI networks, vertical farms, underground cities, and gigantic industrial systems operating non-stop. At first, solar energy seems like the obvious answer. But once you run the numbers, the reality becomes brutal. Even with highly advanced solar panels operating at extremely high efficiency, powering an entire 100 billion person civilization using only solar would require covering enormous portions of Earth with panels. Entire continents could disappear beneath energy infrastructure. So humanity would need something else. Something far more powerful. And whether people like it or not, that answer is probably nuclear energy. Right now, nuclear power remains controversial in many parts of the world. But in a future where civilization depends on extreme energy production, nuclear becomes almost unavoidable. Because compared to solar and wind, nuclear power produces enormous amounts of energy using surprisingly little space. A single nuclear plant can power millions of people. And future reactor designs could become dramatically more efficient than today's technology. There's also another detail most people never realize: modern nuclear reactors waste most of their fuel. Advanced breeder reactors could potentially unlock vastly larger energy reserves by reusing materials considered waste today. Then there's thorium, an alternative nuclear fuel that is far more abundant than uranium and produces less long-term radioactive waste. And if humanity ever perfects fusion energy, everything changes completely. At that point, energy scarcity could practically disappear. But there's another terrifying question hidden beneath all of this. What would life actually feel like in a world with 100 billion people? Would privacy still exist? Would nature survive? Would forests become protected relics surrounded by endless urban civilization? Maybe future humans would spend most of their lives inside hyper-dense megacities connected by underground transport systems and AI-controlled infrastructure. Maybe physical space would become so valuable that entire generations grow up without ever owning land. Or maybe technology would solve problems so efficiently that life becomes more comfortable than it is today. Because history shows something strange about humanity, the more impossible things become. The more creative civilization gets. Every generation believes the limits have been reached. And then humanity breaks them again. 100 years ago, modern skyscrapers barely existed. Artificial intelligence sounded impossible. Landing on the moon sounded insane. The internet didn't exist. Smartphones didn't exist. And feeding 8 billion humans already seemed unrealistic. Yet somehow, civilization adapted. Again and again. So if humanity ever reached 100 billion people, the planet would definitely look unrecognizable compared to today. But collapse would not necessarily be guaranteed. In fact, survival might depend on one thing humanity has always done better than any other species on Earth: inventing new ways to survive. And maybe the strangest part of all, if civilization ever becomes advanced enough to support 100 billion humans on Earth, humanity probably won't stop there. Because once a species learns how to sustain populations at that scale, the next step is obvious. Other planets.